Sometimes your eyes play tricks on you when it's dark. At least that's what I told myself the first time I saw one of them. I had been in my hometown this week visiting my parents when I got a text from an old friend. "Hey Jay, I know you're busy, man," it read. "But Cam is home too, and I thought we could order some food and watch the game." I have never been big on sports, but I hadn't seen Will in well over a year and Cam in even longer. On the way out the door, my mom told me to be safe. Text her when I get there, all the usual. Will lives pretty far back into the woods, and it took me a while to get there. After being chastised a bit for being late, we threw a pizza in the oven and sat down. We spent more time talking about what we'd been up to than watching the game, which was fine by me. Time always flies among good company, and before I knew it, it was well after midnight. "James, just stay, dude. I already cleaned the futon." First of all, I've slept enough nights on that futon to know how bad my back will hurt in the morning. Second, I promised my parents I'd make them breakfast in the morning. After a little more complaining from them, we finally said our goodbyes and made the yearly promise that we will really keep in touch this time. Seeing that it was very late and there were no streetlights for miles, I threw on my high beams and started making my way home. I always have a bit of an uneasy feeling driving dark roads at night, so I opened my phone to put on some music. After 30 seconds of buffering, I remembered how horrible my service was out here and turned off my phone. It was shortly after that when I saw it. In my peripheral vision, I swore I saw a person standing a few yards off the side of the road. A quick glance at my rearview mirror showed nothing of interest and put my mind at ease. Sometimes your eyes play tricks on you when it's dark. I should really start wearing my glasses when I drive. The moment I finished scolding myself, it happened again. A person standing perfectly still on the side of the road. I only caught a glimpse, but this time I was positive I wasn't seeing things. Another look at my mirrors yielded the same result as before, but I knew what I saw. Instinctually, I stepped on the gas a little. I knew these roads like the back of my hand, and I could afford to speed for my peace of mind. Unfortunately, all the peace of mind in the world could not have prepared me for what I saw next. My driver's side mirror exploded as the face of a small girl flew past my window. I slammed on my brakes before I could think. My heart was beating out of my chest as I came to grips with what had just happened. Where had she come from? I may not be the most blessed visually, but I knew that there was nobody in the road for me to have hit. As stupid as it may sound, I stepped out of my car to check on the girl. I wouldn't be able to live with myself if I committed a hit and run. My stomach did a flip when I looked up to see nothing. No little girl, no remnants of my mirror, not even fallen twigs or leaves. The road was bare. Thoroughly scared at this point, I scrambled back into my car and shut the door, barely noticing that my mirror was back in its place, unscathed. That was until I saw a white spot in the corner of my vision. I looked into my newly returned mirror to see two pale figures in plain clothes standing in the tree line maybe 30 feet behind my car. They didn't seem to move. I couldn't make out details in the low light, but I could feel their gazes fixed on me, burning holes through me. I lost control of my body as I felt my foot try to push the gas pedal through the floor. I had never understood how intense true fight or flight is until that moment. I stole another glance at my mirror, and yet again the figures had disappeared. There was a lull, and I took a moment to breathe and get my bearings. I saw a small country billboard that I knew was about halfway between my parents' house and Will's. It had a small light on top to make the advertisement visible at all hours. This brought me a brief moment of comfort that was quickly shattered when I saw what looked like a pair of bare feet below the sign. As I drove past, I turned around, and to my horror, there was a man backlit by the dim glow of the sign. This man was unnaturally tall and gaunt. His facial features were hidden to me, but like before I could feel, whatever it was, staring daggers into my soul. My knuckles turned white, and I thought I might snap the steering wheel in half from how hard I was gripping it. I told myself that no matter what, I would not look in my mirrors again before I made it home. My foot still pressed firmly to the floor. I concentrated on the dark, unmarked pavement. It took all my willpower not to look at the things I saw in the corners of my vision. I was so focused on avoiding my mirrors that it took me almost half a minute to notice the bright red and blue glow that filled them. Realizing what I was seeing, I was brought back down to earth. As much as it pained me, I pulled over into the shallow ditch that lined the road. A shout filled the air as I rolled down my window. "What the fuck do you think you're doing?" Before I could answer, the officer spoke again, more concerned than angry this time. "James, Christ alive, son, are you trying to kill someone? Why are you driving like a goddamn maniac?" Officer Wilcox was a good friend of my father. Those two used to spend nights in our den, drinking and discussing what new gun they bought that week. I thanked God that he was the one to pull me over. "Sir, I am so sorry." What was I going to tell him? That I hit a little girl with my car and ran because I saw something scary in the dark, he would think I'm a fucking lunatic. I was being chased. A car without their lights on was following me until probably a mile back. I know I should have called it in. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Not very believable, but the best I could come up with. Jesus, kid, I don't even know what to say to that. Have you has anything to drink or taken anything tonight? No, sir. A lie. I'd had 2 beers a few hours prior. I really am sorry. I was just so scared and didn't know what to do. All right, I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt and let you off with a warning. I breathed a sigh of relief before he finished. On the condition that tomorrow you come to the station and make a written statement about the incident. Lying to a family friend was one thing, but lying under oath was another thing entirely. I thought for a moment before agreeing to his terms. It was stupid, but it was the choice that got me off this god-forsaken road and behind the locked doors of my parents' house the fastest. He told me that he would drive back the way I came and look for anything suspicious and sent me on my way. All of my anxiety flooded back as he shut his lights off and disappeared from view. Despite that, I also knew that he would be the only officer on duty, and I wouldn't have to worry about my speed for the rest of the drive. I put my foot back to the floor, flying through intersections that I knew would be empty, and catching air a few times over the small hills that dotted the road. My car was taking a beating, but I had to get home. I don't know if it was because I was so hyper-focused on the road, or if there was truly nothing to see for the rest of the ride home. But by the time I reached my driveway, I had not seen another one of the figures. That realization did not help with the massive pit that the thought of walking to my front door created in my stomach. I had never been more afraid than at that moment. Eventually, I psyched myself up enough to make a break for it. I opened my door and ran as fast as I could onto the front porch. While I fumbled to find my house key, I looked over my shoulder out of habit. As far as I could tell, there was nothing to be seen. The neighborhood was as it usually was at this hour, quiet and deserted. As I turned back around, I felt all the air leave my body. In the reflection of the storm door, I saw 2 pale hands on my shoulders and a twisted face towering over my head. I woke up in the back of an ambulance, screaming. My mother had found me unconscious on the porch, bleeding from a gash where I had hit my head on the way down. Nobody believes me when I try to explain what happened. I write this as Officer Wilcox and a quiet man in a suit sit and wait for me to finish. I don't know what they were, but I know that they were real, and I know that I don't drive at night anymore. I was awoken by the sound of rain pattering against my window. My eyes slowly stretched open, darkness consuming my vision as I stared up at the pitch-black ceiling. A flash brightened my room for a second, revealing every inch hidden behind the blanket of black. I rolled my head around, eyes darting to the window beside my bed. I could only see the sky, dark like my room apart from the occasional flash. It took me a minute to wake up and realize what I was doing. When I did, I quickly tossed my head to the other side of my pillow. I was now facing the wall. Panic slowly started to rise in my chest. My heart thumped loudly, even louder than the thunder. I squinted, my eyes shut, my breathing heavy and strained. I had looked out the window. Now, you might be wondering why this is such a bad thing. Ever since I was small, I was told by almost everyone not to look out the window at night. Whenever I would ask why, I would receive a dull response. Something bad will happen, was the usual answer. I wasn't the only person raised with this rule. Every kid in my class was told the same thing, and all of us were equally as confused by it. I figured it was some stupid ploy my town had thought up to keep kids from staying up late. That was until last year when Brody Heathens looked out the window one night. Brody thought the story was nothing but horseshit, and he was determined to prove so. He told the entire school that he would look out his window that night and tell us what happened the next morning. We were all excited, thinking that Brody was as brave as can be, going against our communal rule. I was excited to be at school the morning. I couldn't wait for Brody to arrive and report on what had happened. He was late that day. He came into class looking tired, pale and sickly. At lunch, we all rushed to ask him what happened. He didn't say anything, only looked down at the pitiful ham sandwich in his hands. No matter how many times we asked or how loud we asked, he wouldn't answer. A few people were worried, but most brushed this off, thinking that he was playing a joke. I didn't think he was joking. He looked genuinely affected. He was quiet that whole day, which was more than shocking, as Brody had always been a loudmouth who struggled to keep it down during lessons. I don't think he spoke a word that whole day. He didn't come to school the day after, or the day after that, or any day for the entire week. By now, everyone was concerned. On the second week of Brody not coming to school, we were all called into the assembly hall. There, the school confirmed that Brody had committed suicide and that there would be a ceremony for him in the gym during lunch. The school was silent that day. Only the muffled sobs of Brody's mourning friends filled the halls. We all knew that whatever he saw out the window that night must have driven him to do this. People's curiosity refused to let them leave the topic alone. Suzanne Walters was next. She looked out her window one night and hung herself less than a week later. Then it was Jack Richmond. He looked out his window too and had shot himself in the head with his dad's rifle 3 days later. 3 deaths in 1 month. Everyone was terrified, and we all knew that something was causing them to do this. Something was torturing every person that looked out their window at night. I vowed that I would never do it, but now I had. I lay silent in my bed. The sound of rain grows steadily louder. I waited for something to happen, but nothing did. After a few minutes of sweating and laying still as a statue, I rolled my head back out, peering back out to the sky. I started to calm down. It wasn't so scary, dark but not scary. A confident feeling rose in me. I'm not sure why or how this feeling began, but it was impossible to ignore. I lifted myself up from my mattress, my sheets sticking to my sweat-stained back. I poked my head over the side and looked out the window. There was nothing there. A few dim street lights flicked in the darkness, and a flash of lightning would illuminate the street, revealing nothing but puddles of rain and blacked-out houses resting peacefully beside the sidewalk. Stupid, I chuckled to myself, turning my head to flop back down into my comforter. But something caught my eye just as I moved my head. Something was sitting in the corner of my room. I felt my heart freeze and stop. It was still pitch black in my room, so I couldn't tell what it was, but it looked like a person. They sat on the floor, knees pulled up to their chest, hands clutching their legs as their head was bowed low, face hidden behind their thighs. I couldn't look away from the figure, convinced if I did, it would jump up and rush me. I couldn't move, terrified that if I did, the figure would notice me. Slowly, the figure began to raise its head, bright orange eyes peering at me through the thick darkness. A cracking sound followed in pursuit. The figure rose to its feet. Once it was fully stood up, it was up to my ceiling. I didn't know what to do at that moment. I slowly inched my head towards my pillow, gently resting it against the fabric. I rolled over, slow as a snail, so I was facing my wall. The whole time the figure stayed still, just watching me with its beady orange eyes. I shut my eyes as tight as I possibly could. I couldn't stop the waterfall of tears from dripping down my face, although I did my best to be as quiet as possible, apart from the occasionally loud sniffle. I'm not sure how, but eventually I fell asleep. I woke up the next day. The sun beamed into my room and the figure was gone. I jumped out of my bed and ran downstairs. My parents were sitting in the dining room, and behind them stood the figure. I could see it fully now. Its skin was a dry, muted gray, and it had 2 little slits in its face for nostrils. Wispy tufts of hair crept out from its scaly scalp. It had a long, skinny body. I could see its ribs poking out of its stomach. It had short, stubby, almost dinosaur-like arms with nails as long and as sharp as knives protruding from its fingers. Its orange eyes glared at me, while it smiled, big and commercially white teeth poking out from its gray, chapped lips. "Mom," I muttered, baffled at how my parents couldn't see the figure looming behind them. "Yes, sweetie," she answered in a chipper and unbothered tone. "What's up, bud?" asked my dad. The figure cracked its neck down so its head was looking down at my father, eyes rolled up to the edges of its eyelids, gazing at me. "You're looking a bit pale," my dad said, worried. I wondered if I should tell them. It was obvious they couldn't see it. I choked down my fear and spoke with a hoarse voice. "I'm fine, just tried," I said. I sat down at the table. The thing looked at me the entire time I ate. I followed me to school, diving behind cars and trees every time I tried to look at it. I sat down in class. The thing was standing at the back of the class, watching me. The hair stood up on the back of my neck. Its eyes felt like they were stabbing me. My friend Dave sat down next to me during lunch. "Dude, are you okay? You've been quiet today," he said. I looked up at him. The creature was standing behind him, waving its knife-like fingers around in a strange pattern. Was this the thing that Brody had seen, the thing that drove him to kill himself? I knew it would try and do the same to me. I wouldn't let it. I looked out my window last night. Dave went pale. "There's a creature following me now. Nobody can see it but me. I think it drives you to take your own life. I'm not sure why, but it won't do that to me." I looked up at the creature. It was now snarling at me. I reached its hand up and clapped it down on Dave's head. I watched Dave freeze, and his eyes slowly rolled to the back of his head, blood pouring from them along with his ears and mouth. I jumped to my feet, a nauseous pit rising in my stomach. Dave fell to the ground, staining the grass with cherry-red blood. "Dave," I shouted. "What?" His voice came from behind me. I turned. Dave was standing there alive, but he was also lying on the floor dead. I felt dizzy. I couldn't keep my head straight. My head throbbed as I tumbled to the floor and blacked out. When I woke up, I was in a dark room. There was nothing in the room but a bed. The creature was lying on top of me, face inches away from mine. I wanted to scream, but nothing would leave my mouth. Slowly, the creature's bent down, drool spilling onto my face and into my mouth, choking me. He opened his jaw wide, his jagged white teeth ready to rip me to shreds. Alex, I opened my eyes. I was lying in a hospital bed, bandages wrapped around my temple, and an IV pumping fluids into my body. My mother was sitting beside me, clutching my wrist. "You're awake. You're finally awake," she cried. What my dad said next made my blood run cold. "Why would you drink that rat poison? What were you trying to do? Kill yourself?" I looked up at the small window on my hospital room door. The creature stood there, grinning as its glowing orange eyes pierced right through me. I wasn't the nicest person in my teens. I was the type of teen who would steal and smoke cigarettes, drink on school nights while causing public destruction in my small town along with many others, so I was known to the local police. One evening after some light drinking with some friends, I decided to walk home and try to find some cars to break into along the way while still half cut. I wasn't drunk enough to stagger, but just enough to know what was what. Around 1 a.m. in the morning, walking down the stretch of road, dark and somewhat cold, no luck of finding any cars without alarms, and just said the hell with it and walked home to get some sleep. As I was kicking one of my beer cans on the pavement, I suddenly see light at my feet followed by the sound of a police car siren. I sighed, feeling annoyed, knowing it's Officer Daniels. I stopped with my hands up, and Daniels, who was friends with my dad, comes up behind me shining his flashlight around my feet and notices the can. "Kicking around your evidence, I see. You know your father is gonna kick your ass, right?" I chuckled as he sniffs around me, getting the hint of beer off my breath. "Yeah, what else is new? Can't a kid just have a good time?" He takes my wrists and outs the handcuffs on me. I give no resistance, knowing what to do in these situations since I've been in them for most of my youth. We start walking back to his car with no need for a breathalyzer test. I stand against the car as he searches my pockets and takes out my cigarettes and lighter along with loose change and places them on the hood. My head leaning back, nearly falling asleep as he opens the back door and shoves me inside. I sit up and rest my head on the fence within the car. Being the rebellious teen I am, I smile and begin to ask stupid questions, trying to vex him as good as I can, and as always, he ignores me. He begins typing into his computer and talking on the radio, and suddenly there was a sudden stop in the wind. All the trees come to a sudden stop, and an eerie silence fills the air, which we both took notice. Considering the cool autumn wind around this time of year never let up at all, this was unusual. We start to feel a cold chill, not the kind you get from a cold night, but this one we could both feel in our senses, like something was wrong. I immediately started to sober up at the stang feeling we both got. He looks back at me. "Hey kid, you feel what I'm feeling?" I nod my head as I look out the back window and reply, "Yeah, what the hell is that? This ain't right, dude." He shakes his head as I shook mine. Both start to feel a sharp headache coming on seemingly from out of nowhere. Body starts to get the chills, and a slow building aching pain in the muscles started to form in the both of us. I just happened to look forward out the front windshield, and my eyes widened with fear with what I was seeing. "Look there, the hell is that thing? You see it?" Officer Daniels pinches the skin between his eyes and looks up at the direction I mentioned, and he himself could not believe it. Two thin beings staring back at us in a short distance, standing just out of the headlights range. Their eyes were round and black with small mouths and nostrils, round heads with sort of kind of grew out the side of their temples. They must have been at least 7 feet tall with 3 fingers on each hand and foot. They stood on the road observing us and occasionally looking at one another and back at us again. The headaches only got worse even as they started walking towards the car. Daniels sat with his hand on the steering wheel like he was about to try and make a break for it and run this tall suckers over. But from what I could tell, fear had frozen every fiber in his body as I screamed at him to put the pedal to the metal. I began to feel dizzy from the headache. My vision started to spin out of control to the point of feeling to pass out right then and there, and from what I can tell, Daniels passed out from the same symptoms as his head was slumped forward with his hands dropped to his side. I started to keel sideways in the back seat, but could still sort of see as I squinted my eyes slightly while trying to stay awake. I take notice to one of these creatures leaning down and looking into the window and placing its hand on the glass. As much as I wanted to, I couldn't scream or fight my way out of this feeling. I looked into this thing's big round black eyes even as it tapped its hand against the glass while moving its mouth and pointing down the road for whatever reason. I then started to get the weird feeling that this thing was reading my every thought of fear, and the more it stood there, the more I felt my mind was being molested, like it was going through every memory I had in my mind. I started to see slight flashbacks of myself when I was young, and I couldn't fight it, helpless and scared at what was going to happen next. The next thing I knew, there was a sudden bright flash of light, and for a split second, the creatures were gone, blink of an eye type of thing. I immediately sat up screaming and kicking the door. Daniels, wake up, man," banging my head against the fence as he jerks up, grabbing the steering wheel, screaming with his own sense of fear. What? Where'd they go? The hell happened? I rest my head against the window, catching my breath, and all that ugly feeling we both felt had started to disappear from our bodies, both snapping out from the headaches, and Daniels gets out from the car to catch his breath, nearly crying and wailing from what we experienced. He opens the back door, drags me out from the car, and spins me around, unlocking the cuffs from my wrist. I rest my arms and head on the trunk of the car, nearly crying myself. I've never felt that kind of fear before, and I'm pretty sure Daniels hasn't either. Safe to say we were both shaken up pretty bad from that experience, so shaken up that he let me go just before we both promised not to speak a word of what took place in the middle of that road. Car had no dash cam, he had no body cam. Considering this was nearly 20 years ago, we had no evidence at all for what happened, so who would even believe us? After that whole unreal ordeal, I smartened up and always made sure to be home before sundown. As for Daniels, he got a transfer request approved to the next state over. He ran from the problem, which I wish I could have done the same, but here I am, haunted and uneasy every time I have to drive my own kids down that same road. There is just no getting away from it. Even if I was to move out of this town, that fear feeling and the image of those big black round eyes would still most likely follow me wherever I go.